Story number 1.
The plan was simple. One last camping trip before winter really set in. It had been a long year. Stress from work, failed relationships, the usual grind, and we needed an escape. So when my friend Noah found a remote, barely used site in the Blue Ridge Mountains, we all jumped at the idea. It would just be the three of us, me, Noah, and his cousin Chris. The drive was about 5 hours out, past winding roads and into an area where cell service disappeared completely. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, with the gray sky already hinting at bad weather. The trailhead was easy to miss, just a narrow path at the edge of an old service road, marked by a hand-painted wooden sign that simply said, Foster Ridge. None of us had heard of it before, but Noah claimed he'd found it on an old backpacking forum, where someone mentioned the solitude and unspoiled nature of the area. That was enough for us. We hiked in about 3 miles, gaining elevation quickly as the woods closed in around us. Trees grew dense, tall, and eerily quiet. Even our boots hitting the damp soil felt too loud. Chris joked that it felt like walking through a soundproof tunnel. I laughed, but he was right. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the silence became. The campsite wasn't much, just a flat clearing on a ridge overlooking a steep drop-off into a valley. There was a crude fire pit made of stones, blackened from old use, and a single decaying bench someone had made from a log and 2 short stumps. The lake Noah mentioned in the forum turned out to be more of a murky pond about 50 yards off, mostly covered in algae and ringed by tall, dead reeds. We set up our tents quickly, conscious of the dark clouds piling in. Rain started as a light mist, but within an hour it was a full downpour. The fire was tough to start, but eventually Chris managed it, and we huddled around it under a tarp we tied between 2 trees. The mood was good. Cold beers helped. We told stories, mostly from high school, and laughed harder than we had in months. Around 10 p.m., the rain eased up slightly, and I wandered off a bit to relieve myself. I went toward the edge of the ridge, maybe 15 feet from the camp. That's when I heard something that didn't fit. It was faint, but distinct, like someone walking just below the ridge, among the trees. Not animals, not the wind. Definite human steps. I froze and tried to focus. The steps paused, then started again, slower now. I couldn't see anything in the dark, but I had this awful feeling of being watched. I made my way back quickly, not mentioning it. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe the forest just played tricks on your ears. But I couldn't shake the sensation. Back at camp, the fire had died down and we were all feeling the cold. We called it a night, each crawling into our respective tents. I zipped mine tight and pulled my damp sleeping bag around me, listening to the rain pick up again. Every now and then a gust of wind shook the trees and made the tarp above us flap like distant thunder. I must have drifted off, because the next time I opened my eyes, it was pitch black. Not just dark, completely devoid of light. Even the usual glow from my watch was dead. My ears filled with rain, the relentless patter like static against the tent walls. Then something changed, a sound distinct from the rain, a slow dragging noise like someone pulling a branch or heavy cloth through wet leaves. It came from the direction of the pond. I held my breath. The sound stopped suddenly, replaced by something far worse, a child's voice, whispering, just inches from my tent wall. Are you alone? I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My heart thudded so hard I thought it might drown out everything else. Then silence. I don't know how long I lay there, rigid, not daring to breathe. At some point I passed out, or maybe fell into some half-sleep, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I rushed out of the tent, soaked and shaking. Chris and Noah were already up, both looking like hell. Chris was pale, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. Noah just said, "Did you hear anything last night?" I nodded slowly. "What did you hear?" Chris finally spoke, voice hoarse. "I heard a little girl crying, right outside my tent, and then she started laughing." Noah added, "I didn't hear a voice, but I saw footprints, in the mud, small, bare." We walked around the site together. Sure enough, there were prints, tiny, barefoot tracks leading from the pond to the fire pit. Then they just stopped. They didn't lead away. They didn't circle. They simply ended in the middle of the clearing. We debated what to do. Part of me wanted to pack up and get the hell out of there, but Noah argued that maybe someone was out there, a kid who got lost or separated from a group. It didn't make sense, but the idea of leaving someone behind felt worse than staying. We decided to look around before making any decisions. We followed the path from the pond into the woods, calling out occasionally. The forest was damp and dark, the canopy so thick that even mid-morning looked like dusk. Then we found it. An old cabin, half collapsed, hidden by overgrowth. Its roof sagged inward, and one wall had completely caved in. The door still hung loosely on rusted hinges. We approached slowly, unsure why it felt so wrong. Inside was a single room, moldy, rotten wood, a rusted stove in the corner, and in the middle of the floor a child's shoe, muddy. Chris turned away, muttering he was done. Noah stepped deeper in, but I stayed at the doorway. Something about that cabin felt suffocating, like it was holding its breath. Noah crouched to look at the shoe. "It's recent," he said. "No mold. Could be someone's here." Then we heard it again. That voice. From behind the cabin. "Help me." We ran outside, circling around, but there was nothing. No one. We stood there, soaked and shivering, unsure what to do. Then Chris screamed. He was staring back at the cabin window. There was someone there, he shouted. A girl. Her face. It was wrong. We didn't go back in. We just ran. Back to the camp. Back to our tents. We packed everything in record time, not even caring about wet gear or forgotten supplies. We just wanted out. The trail back felt longer than before. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent jolts through us. It rained the whole time, a relentless, cold downpour that soaked through everything. By the time we reached the car, it was already getting dark. We threw our stuff in the trunk and climbed in, teeth chattering. As Noah started the engine, Chris turned to me. She followed us. I looked back. Through the trees, far down the trail, stood a small figure. A girl in a pale dress, soaked through, head tilted to one side. She didn't move. She didn't wave. She just watched. We didn't say a word as we pulled away. We didn't stop until we hit pavement again, where the road met the small gas station an hour outside the forest. We sat in silence, drinking bad coffee and staring at the rain as it kept falling. None of us ever talked about it again. Not really. Chris dropped out of college a few months later. Noah started seeing a therapist, but wouldn't say why. Me? I moved to the city and haven't camped since, but sometimes when it rains at night, I still wake up hearing that voice. Are you alone? And I lie there.
Story number 2.
We had been planning the camping trip for months. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend, just me and a few close friends, getting away from everything. No phones, no distractions, just nature and the quiet hum of the outdoors. We drove out to a remote forest, a place none of us had been to before, but one that seemed perfect for the adventure we were looking for. The forecast called for some rain in the evening, but nothing too serious. A little rain was nothing to us. After all, we'd camped in worse conditions. The forest was beautiful when we arrived. The towering trees, the sound of distant birds, and the fresh, earthy smell of the damp ground. It was quiet, too quiet in some ways. No other campers were in sight. Our group consisted of me, my old college friend Kate, and her boyfriend Josh. We made camp in a secluded area by a small stream that ran through the forest, setting up our tents and gathering firewood. The rain hadn't started yet, and the sky was overcast, but we figured we'd get a nice evening by the fire before the storm hit. We cooked dinner over the fire, talked about old times, and cracked open a couple of beers. Everything felt just as it should, peaceful and carefree. But the weather was starting to shift. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the first raindrops began to fall, slowly at first, then harder, until it was coming down in sheets. The fire sputtered out, and we retreated into our tents, hoping the rain would pass quickly. I wasn't exactly tired, but there was something about the steady rhythm of the rain hitting the tent that made my eyes heavy. I lay down in my sleeping bag, the noise outside a soft lullaby. Kate and Josh were in their tent not far from mine, and I could hear their muffled voices. It wasn't long before I drifted off to sleep. The sound of rain continued through the night, but around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly. It wasn't the rain that had disturbed me. It was something else. A faint sound, almost too soft to hear, but enough to make me stir. I listened closely, straining to hear it over the patter of the rain. It was a scratching sound, light but persistent, like fingernails dragging against the tent. I sat up, my heart rate quickening, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a branch or something caught in the wind. But then it came again. Tap, tap, right against the side of my tent. I froze. My mind raced, trying to figure out what it could be. A squirrel? A raccoon? Something bigger? I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped the tent, and stuck my head out just a little. The rain pelted me instantly, and I couldn't see much beyond the soft glow of my flashlight. There was nothing there. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It's just the wind, I whispered to myself. I was being paranoid. I zipped the tent back up, settled down in my sleeping bag, and tried to force myself to sleep. But the scratching continued. Tap, tap, tap. It was louder this time, more deliberate. And it wasn't coming from just one side of the tent anymore. It was coming from all around me. I sat up again, my heart racing in my chest. I grabbed the flashlight and shone it in every direction, but there was nothing there. The forest was silent except for the rain. Kate? I whispered, hoping she was still awake. Josh? No response. The wind must have been playing tricks on me. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself it was just my imagination running wild. But then the scratching came again, this time right at the entrance of my tent, just inches from where I lay. I bolted upright, my pulse pounding in my ears. The sound wasn't just a tap anymore. It was something dragging, scraping against the fabric. The noise was so close I could feel the vibrations in my chest. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Kate! Josh! I called out louder this time, my voice shaky. I didn't care if they were asleep. I needed to know they were there. Nothing. I couldn't take it anymore. My body was shaking with fear, but I forced myself to unzip the tent and step outside. The rain hit me like a wall. It was dark, and the trees loomed over me, their branches creaking in the wind. I aimed the flashlight around, heart hammering in my chest, expecting to see something. Anything, but there was nothing there. Nothing except the trees and the mist rolling through the forest, thick and heavy, the kind of mist that made the trees look like shadowy figures. I didn't know what to do. I stood there for a moment, the cold rain soaking through my clothes, feeling as though the forest was closing in around me. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something move. A shadow. It was quick, but unmistakable. Something tall and thin, moving between the trees. I spun around, the flashlight trembling in my hand. Kate? Josh? I shouted, my voice breaking. No answer. I ran back to the tent, not even thinking about the flashlight anymore. I had to get inside, had to get away from whatever that was. I zipped the tent shut behind me, heart still racing, my breath coming in short gasps. I was disoriented, too afraid to look back outside. And then, for the first time that night, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice. Soft, almost like a whisper, but unmistakably human. Let me in. The voice was distant, coming from somewhere in the forest. It was not Kate's voice. It was not Josh's voice. It was something else. Something wrong. My mind scrambled to make sense of it, but the words kept repeating in my head. Let me in. I couldn't stay there any longer. I had to get out. I grabbed my phone and tried to call Kate, but there was no signal. The rain had intensified and the wind had picked up, making the trees creak and groan. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I waited for what felt like an eternity, too scared to even move. But the voice didn't come again. The night was eerily silent, except for the rain. By morning, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept at all, and the events of the night felt like a blur. I didn't want to go outside, but I knew I had to. I unzipped the tent, half expecting to see something standing there, waiting for me. But there was nothing. No signs of anyone or anything. No strange marks on the ground. No evidence that anything had been there. It was as though the night had been a bad dream. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching us, something that had wanted us to leave. When I went to check on Kate and Josh, I found that their tent was empty. The rain had finally stopped, and the sun was rising, but they were gone. Their bags were still there, but neither of them had been in their tent when I woke up. I called their phones, but neither of them answered. It was as if they had vanished. I don't know what happened to them. The park rangers didn't know either when I called for help. They searched the area for days, but found nothing. No signs of struggle. No evidence that anyone had even been there. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if it was the weather, the isolation, or something else entirely. But I do know that I haven't been camping since, and I never plan to again. Sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I still hear that voice in the back of my mind, whispering to me from the trees. Let me in. Story the end.
Story number 3.
It was supposed to be a simple camping trip. Nothing extravagant, just me and my 2 friends, Tom and Jared. We had been talking about getting out into the woods for weeks, but life always seemed to get in the way. Finally, we managed to coordinate our schedules for a weekend in late October. The weather forecast promised clear skies with a little chill at night. Perfect conditions for a few days in the wilderness, or so we thought. We chose a small, secluded campsite near a lake, about an hour's drive from town. The site was deep in the woods, so it would be just the 3 of us. No other campers, no distractions, just nature and the quiet. We packed the usual camping gear: tents, sleeping bags, a cooler full of food, and a small propane stove for cooking. It was going to be a relaxing escape, a chance to disconnect from the hustle and bustle of our daily lives. The drive up was uneventful. We joked and listened to music as the scenery passed by, the trees gradually changing from the green of summer to the fiery reds and oranges of autumn. We stopped for gas once, grabbed some snacks, and continued on our way, finally turning off the main road and onto a dirt trail that led us deep into the forest. When we arrived at the campsite, it was still daylight. The air was crisp, and the sound of the wind through the trees was calming. The lake shimmered under the fading sun, and we took a few moments to admire the view before setting up camp. The fire pit was already there, surrounded by a circle of smooth stones. We set up our tents, stashed our gear, and began collecting wood for the fire. By the time we had everything set up, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the temperature had dropped noticeably. The 3 of us sat around the fire, talking and laughing as we cooked dinner and sipped on some beer. The crackle of the fire was the only sound that filled the air, other than the occasional rustle of leaves in the trees. It was around 10 p.m. when the first drop of rain hit. At first, it was just a light drizzle, nothing that seemed like it would ruin the night. We kept the fire going, huddling closer to it for warmth. But as the rain picked up, the fire began to struggle. It wasn't long before we had to abandon the campfire entirely. We huddled in our tents to wait it out, joking about how bad the weather had gotten and how our camping trip was turning into a bust. But even as the rain intensified, something about the night felt off. The wind picked up, making the trees sway in ways that seemed unnatural. The sound of branches scraping against each other in the dark was unsettling, and the rain turned from a gentle shower to a full-on downpour. It wasn't the kind of storm that made you want to sleep through it. It was the kind that kept you awake, alert, on edge. I lay in my tent, listening to the storm outside, trying to ignore the creeping sense of discomfort that had settled in my chest. Tom and Jared's muffled voices drifted through the thin walls of my tent, but their conversation didn't sound like it had a particular subject. It was like they were just speaking to fill the silence, something I realized I had started to do as well. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something I couldn't quite identify. That's when I heard it. At first, it was just a faint sound, almost like the wind picking up again, but then I realized it was different. It was a distinct sound, a heavy, deliberate thudding. It came from somewhere beyond the trees, a rhythmic, steady pounding that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The rain was so loud that at first I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, but then it came again, closer this time. A deep, resonant thud, followed by the sound of something dragging through the wet earth. I sat up in my sleeping bag, heart pounding in my chest. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a bear, moving through the woods. But it didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard before. There was a heaviness to it, a weight that didn't belong in the natural world. The dragging sound continued for several seconds, then stopped. I waited, straining my ears to catch any sign of movement. But nothing came. The rain kept falling, the wind howled through the trees, and the world outside my tent seemed unnaturally still. Then I heard it again. Closer this time. It wasn't a thud anymore, but a dragging, scraping sound like something was dragging itself across the forest floor. I quickly unzipped the door of my tent and crawled out, the rain immediately soaking my clothes. My flashlight flickered in the wind, and I pointed it toward the woods, scanning the tree line. But there was nothing there, just darkness and rain. "Jared?" I called, my voice shaky. "You guys hear that?" There was no immediate response. I glanced back at their tents, but the only movement was the sway of the rain against the fabric. I was about to call out again when the sound came a third time, a long, drawn-out scrape. It sounded so close now that I could feel it vibrating in my chest. I stepped away from my tent, flashlight in hand, and cautiously walked toward the trees, trying to follow the sound. As I reached the edge of the clearing, the dragging stopped, but the air felt thick. The wind had died down, and the only sound that remained was the rain. I stood there for a few seconds, straining my ears, trying to pinpoint the source of the noise, but all I could hear was the storm. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. It was small at first, just a flicker of movement in the shadows, but it caught my attention. Something dark and unnatural, moving just inside the trees. I turned the flashlight toward it, but it disappeared. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the area, but nothing moved. I turned back to my tent, ready to call it a night, when I heard something behind me. A whisper, soft, low, and almost unintelligible. I spun around, the flashlight's beam darting through the trees. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to myself, but there was nothing there. No movement, no sound. I hurried back to my tent, my legs shaking. I couldn't explain what had happened, but I knew something wasn't right. I dove into my sleeping bag and pulled it tightly around me, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. Minutes later, Tom and Jared stumbled out of their tents, their faces wet from the rain. Tom's eyes were wide, his face pale. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "The thudding?" I nodded, my throat dry. "Yeah, I heard it too." Jared looked around, his expression confused. "What the hell was that? Some kind of animal?" "I don't know," I said, my voice tight. But it didn't sound like any animal I've ever heard before. We stood there in the rain, our flashlights scanning the trees, but there was no sign of movement. It was as if whatever had made the sound had vanished into the night. "I'm not staying out here any longer," Tom said. "I don't know what that was, but I don't want to find out." "We're not going back to the car in this storm," Jared protested. "We'll wait it out. Just stay close to the fire." But there was no fire. The rain had put that out hours ago. The only light was from our flashlights, weak and flickering against the storm. "I'm with Tom," I said. "We're getting out of here." Jared looked from me to Tom, his face uncertain. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, let's pack up and get out of here." We hurried to break down the tents and gather our gear, but the rain made everything harder. The ground was slick and muddy, our clothes soaked through. The entire time, I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something moving in the darkness. But there was nothing, just the trees and the relentless rain. We were almost ready to leave when we heard it again, the scraping sound. This time it was right behind us. I turned around, my flashlight catching something, someone, standing just beyond the edge of the trees. A figure, hunched and tall, barely visible in the shadows. It was dragging something behind it, something long and heavy. And then, without warning, the figure stepped into the light. It wasn't human. The thing was tall and thin, its skin stretched tight across its bones, pale and damp from the rain. Its face was a grotesque mask, with wide, hollow eyes that seemed to stare through us. Its mouth was open, but there were no words, just the sound of heavy breathing, the wet scrape of its limbs dragging along the ground. We froze, unable to move. For a moment, it seemed to just watch us, its head tilting to one side, as if it was studying us, trying to figure out what to do next. Then, without warning, it turned and vanished into the woods, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. We didn't wait to see if it was coming back. We ran. The rain pelted us as we scrambled toward the trail, not stopping until we were back in the car, speeding away from the campsite, leaving everything behind. We never went back to that place. And to this day, every time I hear the rain at night, I remember the sound of dragging, the low, wet scrape that still echoes in my mind. Story the end.
Story number 4.
The weekend had been planned for months. Every year since college, our little group of 6 made it a tradition to camp together. This time, we picked a spot in the mountains of northern Washington, deep into the forest, surrounded by tall evergreens and far from anything resembling civilization. It wasn't an official campground, just a clearing someone had marked on a hiking forum as secluded but peaceful. That's exactly what we wanted. No kids running around, no other groups nearby, just the 6 of us, a fire, and nature. The forecast had mentioned some rain, but it didn't seem like a big deal. All of us had decent gear, and we were used to roughing it a bit. The drive out took nearly 5 hours. The last two were on uneven gravel roads, twisting through the trees. Once we parked and hiked in, we found the clearing just as described. There was even a stone fire ring left behind from previous campers. Everything felt promising. It was me, my girlfriend Danny, our friends Matt and Christina, and another couple, Shane and Bree. We set up our tents in a semicircle, laid out tarps, and got a small fire going. The first night was uneventful, calm, even fun. We drank cheap beer, cooked foil packet meals, told the same stories we always told, and laughed like idiots under the stars. But everything changed the second night. That's when the rain started. Around 6 p.m. it began to drizzle, so we quickly rigged up a couple of tarps between the trees and gathered underneath. We played cards and drank, trying to ignore the worsening weather. By 9 p.m., the rain had become a steady pounding rhythm on the tarp above. The fire died down to flickers, struggling in the wet air. Fog started to creep into the clearing, rising in soft, crawling tendrils. It wasn't cold, not really, but something about the rain and fog made it feel colder than it should have. Matt kept glancing toward the tree line, barely visible through the gray mist. He's not usually the nervous type, but he looked on edge. "You good?" I asked him quietly. He nodded, then shrugged. "Thought I heard something earlier. Probably just animals." I left it at that. By 10:30, we were calling it a night. Danny and I retreated to our tent, shaking water from our jackets and climbing into the sleeping bags. The rain kept coming, relentless. It drowned out every other noise. No crickets, no wind, just the sound of water hitting the nylon above us like static. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up needing to pee. It was the kind of need that you try to ignore. Hope will go away, but gets worse the longer you lay there. I sighed, unzipped the tent, and stepped out into the rain. The forest looked completely different in the dark and fog. My headlamp barely cut through the mist. Trees became looming shadows, and the path toward the edge of the clearing looked like a tunnel into nothingness. I took maybe 10 steps from the tent when I heard it. A whisper. Not from Danny, not from the others. This was distant. Thin. A word I couldn't understand. I froze, hands still on my belt. "Hello?" I called out, softly. No response. I waited, then shook my head. Maybe wind, maybe the rain playing tricks. I hurried back to the tent, forgetting I even needed to pee. Danny stirred as I climbed back inside. "You okay?" she mumbled. "Yeah," I whispered. "Just thought I heard something." She turned over, and I listened to the rain until sleep took me again. In the morning, things were off. Shane and Bri were already up when we emerged. Shane was pacing near the fire pit, Bri sitting silently under the tarp with a blanket over her shoulders. Her eyes were red. "What's going on?" Danny asked. Shane stopped pacing. Something was outside our tent last night." Matt and Christina appeared then, also looking pale. "We heard it too," Christina said. "Something brushed against our tent around 3 a.m. At first I thought it was one of you messing around, but then it lingered." "Like standing there?" Danny asked. "No," she said, voice lower now. "It crawled. I could hear it, slow, scraping, like it was dragging something." None of us spoke. I was about to mention the whisper when Shane added, "We unzipped the tent just enough to peek out, and I swear to God something was out there, just standing. No flashlight, no gear, just there." No one said anything for a while. We tried to make breakfast. No one really ate. The fire barely held in the wet. By noon, Matt said he wanted to pack up and leave early. Everyone else agreed. But then we realized something strange. Our phones, which we'd turned off to save battery, wouldn't power back on. Not one of them. And it wasn't just dead batteries. They wouldn't even vibrate back, wouldn't light up. It was like they had been fried. We tried the car, thinking maybe we could charge them there. But when we got to the vehicle, an old Suburban we'd carpooled in, the battery was completely dead, and the driver's side window was shattered, glass in the seat. There were deep gouges on the hood. 3 parallel scratches, too wide for a bear, too clean for a rock fall. They weren't there when we arrived. No one spoke as we walked back to the camp. The fog was thicker now. The rain had lessened, but the air felt heavier, oppressive. By nightfall, we agreed to keep a watch. Shane and I would take first shift, sitting under the tarp with the fire barely alive between us. We held knives, laughable really, and listened. At around 2 a.m., we heard footsteps, wet, deliberate, slow. They came from the forest, circled the clearing. Not animals, too rhythmic, too heavy. We sat frozen, barely breathing. Then we saw a figure, tall, thin, moving through the fog between the trees. We could only see parts of it, a leg here, a shoulder there, as it passed behind trunks, but we both saw it. We both felt it, watching. It didn't come into the clearing, it just circled. Around 3:30, we woke Matt and Christina for their shift and told them everything. Shane and I didn't sleep. We just lay there, holding hands with our partners, waiting for morning. When the sun came, the clearing was silent. The fog had thinned slightly, but not gone. We began packing immediately. Stuffed tents into bags, left the food, left the water cans, didn't care. As we reached the road, Shane said, "Where's Bree?" We all stopped. She had been walking behind us just moments ago. We called her name over and over, searched the sides of the trail. Nothing, not a single footprint off the path. We debated going back, but something told us not to. The air had gone still. No birds, no rain, just silence. We kept walking. It took us over 6 hours to reach the highway, where we flagged down a truck driver who took us to a ranger station. A search party was sent. They combed the woods for 3 days, found our campsite, our gear, even Bree's sleeping bag. But no sign of her. They questioned us, accused us, investigated, but found nothing to charge. Eventually, they stopped calling. That was 3 years ago. None of us have been camping since. We rarely talk about it. Shane drinks now. Christina moved across the country. Matt doesn't answer calls. Danny still wakes up at night, gasping. Sometimes when the rain hits our windows just right, we both swear we hear the whisper. Story the end.
Story number 5.
The plan had started out so simple. A weekend camping trip, just me and my girlfriend Serena, a couple of hours outside the city to disconnect. We both needed it, her from her job at the vet clinic, and me from the nonstop grind of running tech support from home. The forecast had said there might be light rain on Saturday night, but nothing we couldn't handle. We'd been through worse. We packed up the car Friday morning, stopped at a grocery store for supplies, and drove out to a campground near the edge of Pine Ridge Forest. It was a lesser-known area, not totally off-grid, but remote enough that you could go hours without seeing another soul. We liked it that way. Quiet, isolated, peaceful. At least, that's what we thought. The site we picked was down a narrow dirt road barely wide enough for the car. It opened into a flat area surrounded by trees and a steep hill on one side. No other campers were around. We could still hear the main road if we listened hard enough, but otherwise it felt like we were completely alone. By Friday evening, we had the tent up, fire pit set, and dinner cooking. The woods were quiet except for the occasional bird call and the wind through the branches. That night, we sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets, sharing a flask of whiskey while Serena told me about the crazy things she'd seen at work. Like a guy bringing in a snake he swore was possessed. We laughed, we stargazed, and then we turned in. Saturday started off great. We hiked a few trails, found a small creek, and had lunch on a rock outcropping overlooking the forest. The clouds started rolling in by late afternoon, and by dusk, a fine mist had started falling. It wasn't a problem at first. We zipped up the tent, lit the camp lantern, and played cards inside. The rain picked up as the hours passed, a steady tapping that became a background rhythm. We didn't think much of it. Around midnight, I woke up. The rain had gotten heavier, sheets of it pounding the tent, and wind gusts made the fabric shudder. I lay there for a moment, listening. Serena was asleep beside me, her breathing soft. I needed to pee, but the idea of stepping out into the cold rain wasn't appealing. Still, nature called. I grabbed the flashlight, unzipped the tent, and stepped out. The night was pitch black, except where the beam from my flashlight cut through the rain. Water was pooling around the base of the tent. I walked a short distance toward the trees and did my business, squinting around out of habit. The trees shifted in the wind, and rain beat down like tiny needles. Just as I turned to head back, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. It was quick, just a flicker of movement behind the trees. A dark shape, tall, definitely not an animal. My stomach tightened. I lifted the flashlight again and swept the area. Nothing, just trees and shadows. I stood there a few seconds longer, trying to shake the weird feeling crawling up my spine. Then I turned and went back into the tent, brushing water off my shoulders. Serena stirred. "You okay?" she murmured. "Yeah," I whispered. Just the rain. I didn't mention what I thought I saw. It was probably just my imagination. Rain, wind, shadows, they played tricks on you. I convinced myself of that and tried to sleep. A few hours later, something woke us both up. It wasn't the rain. It was this rhythmic sound. Tap, tap, tap. Not like rain on the tent, but sharper, more deliberate. Serena sat up. What is that? I listened. It stopped. I don't know, I said, keeping my voice low. Then it started again. Tap, tap, but closer, like it was coming from the backside of the tent. We both froze. I reached for the flashlight again, turned it on, and aimed it toward the tent wall. Something moved against the fabric. Not a hand. It was slower than that, like someone dragging a finger or a stick, tracing the curve of the tent. Serena whispered, "That's not the wind." I shook my head slowly. "Stay here." "Are you serious?" I didn't answer. I unzipped the flap and stepped out. The rain had lightened to a drizzle. Mist floated between the trees, thick and low. The flashlight's beam felt too narrow, too weak. I circled the tent, stepping carefully in the mud. Nothing. No animals. No people. No tracks. I stood in place, heart pounding, listening. For a while, all I could hear was the soft dripping of water from the trees. Then I heard it. A voice. It was faint, distant, female, somewhere down the hill near the trees. "Hello?" I stopped breathing, my ears strained. "Is someone there?" The voice called. It sounded off, like someone mimicking a person but getting the tone slightly wrong. Robotic, echoey, too even. Something was wrong with it. Serena had stepped out behind me. "Who's that?" "I don't know," I said, eyes fixed on the darkness. "Stay close." We waited. The voice didn't come again. I called out, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" No reply. We stood there for several minutes, barely moving. Then I saw it again, farther down the hill this time. A figure, partially obscured by trees. It was standing perfectly still, facing us. I couldn't make out details, just the pale impression of a body. And then it stepped back and disappeared into the mist. We packed up within minutes. I didn't care about the soaked tent or the muddy gear. We threw what we could into the car, leaving behind a chair and our camp stove. Serena was shaking, and I couldn't stop glancing behind us as we worked. I kept expecting to see that figure again, standing at the edge of the woods, closer this time. We drove out in silence. The road was slick and dark, the headlights barely showing the path ahead. I didn't feel safe until we hit the highway. Back home, we both tried to convince ourselves it had just been someone else camping nearby. Maybe a hiker. Maybe some weird loner who didn't want company. That's what we told our friends when they asked why we'd cut the trip short. But something stayed with us. The day after we got back, I noticed muddy handprints on the side of my car. Not fingerprints, not child-sized. They were wide, long, and smeared, as if whoever made them had pressed their whole palm to the metal and dragged it slowly. Serena started having nightmares, waking up in a cold sweat, saying she could hear someone whispering her name from the forest. At first, I chalked it up to stress, the mind playing tricks. But then I heard it too. 3 nights in a row, I woke up around 3 a.m., heart racing, certain I had just heard someone say, "Hello?" from the window. There was never anyone there. We eventually took the car in to be detailed and tossed the gear we'd used. Something about it all felt wrong, tainted, like it had followed us back. Weeks passed and the dreams became less frequent. The whispers stopped. But I still think about that night. The tapping on the tent, the voice calling out in the rain, the figure standing still in the trees. I don't know what it was and I don't want to, but I've never gone camping again. Story the end.
Story number 6.
The rain came down hard that night. Heavy, relentless, and steady as we set up camp near the edge of a dense forest. It wasn't supposed to rain, or at least not this much, but that's how things always go when you're least prepared. The weather had been fine when we hiked in, the sky a deep, clear blue, but the clouds gathered fast, and by the time we had pitched our tents and gathered firewood, the first few drops had begun to fall. At first, we thought it would pass quickly, like it always does, but it didn't. I had been hiking with my brother Alex and a couple of his friends, Ben and Taylor. We'd planned this trip for weeks. All of us were looking for some quiet, some time away from the noise of our regular lives. None of us had camped in a while, but it wasn't something we'd never done before. We knew how to set up tents, build a fire, cook food, and tell ghost stories around the campfire. That's what we thought this trip would be. Just a simple, relaxing weekend in the woods. We were wrong. By the time the rain was falling in sheets, there was no fire. We couldn't keep it going in the downpour, and the wood we had gathered was too wet to burn. So we huddled in our tents, playing cards and joking around to pass the time. The sound of rain hitting the tent walls was almost soothing, the rhythm of it a kind of white noise that made me drowsy. But then, just before I dozed off, I heard something strange. It wasn't the wind, or the rain, or any animal. It was a sound that didn't fit. A scraping sound. Faint at first, but it was there. Steady. Methodical. It didn't sound like it was coming from the outside of the tent, but more like it was coming from underneath it, as if something was dragging itself along the ground beneath us. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. It was so quiet in the tent, the rain making everything feel more intimate, more enclosed. Maybe it was the trees shifting in the wind or a branch falling, but the sound continued, scraping, slow, deliberate. Then a soft thud. I wasn't sure what to do. I lay there, frozen, listening. The others were quiet too, maybe already asleep. The longer the scraping sound went on, the more uneasy I felt. It wasn't natural. It wasn't the sound of animals or wind. It was something different, something wrong. I sat up slowly, careful not to make noise, and unzipped the tent just a little. My breath caught in my throat as I peeked outside. Nothing, just darkness and rain, the forest trees swaying in the wind. The sound had stopped. My heart was pounding now, adrenaline kicking in. I waited a few more seconds, but there was no movement, just the rain and the occasional rustle of leaves. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the mind. Maybe the tent had shifted in the wind, or maybe some animal had brushed against it. Whatever it was over. But then, there it was again, a faint scraping sound. I stiffened, and this time I could tell it was definitely coming from underneath the tent. It wasn't just the rain or wind. Something was beneath us, dragging its body along the wet ground. I shook Alex awake, whispering urgently, "Alex, wake up! I think something's under the tent." He mumbled something in his sleep, annoyed, but I shook him harder. "Alex, wake up!" His eyes opened, and he groggily looked at me. "What? What's going on?" "Listen," I whispered, pointing toward the floor of the tent. He sat up and listened. For a few long seconds there was nothing. Then the sound came again, a scraping, followed by the soft thud of something moving slowly, painfully, beneath us. His face went pale. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. "I don't know," I replied, voice tight with fear, "but it's real. It's underneath the tent." Alex didn't hesitate. He reached for the flashlight, unzipped the tent, and cautiously poked his head out into the rain. I wanted to stop him, to tell him to wait, but I was just as terrified. We both sat there in the dark, listening. The rain was now pouring down in sheets, but there was something else, something I couldn't put my finger on. It felt like the woods had gone quiet again. No wind, no rustling, just silence, heavy and still. And then I heard it. A low, guttural sound, almost like a breath, but deep, unnatural. Something was breathing beneath us. "Alex?" I said, my voice trembling. Alex stood up, shining the flashlight in a wide arc around the tent. But there was nothing. The ground was wet and dark, just like before. Nothing was moving. "We should check it out," he said, his voice shaking with uncertainty. "No," I replied, panic rising. "I don't want to know what that was. We need to get out of here. Now." But before we could make any decisions, we heard it again, closer this time, a long, slow scrape, and then the unmistakable sound of nails or claws scratching against the ground. It wasn't an animal. It was too slow, too methodical. I grabbed my jacket and we both scrambled to get out of the tent. Alex and I rushed outside, the rain pounding on our faces, soaking us in an instant. We scanned the area, but there was nothing there, no creature, no shape in the darkness. "Where the hell is it?" I said, breathing hard. My heart was racing. I felt like I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up, and the fear was crawling up my spine. "Let's go check the others," Alex suggested. We hurried to the next tent, the one Ben and Taylor were in. The storm had picked up even more, the sound of it now deafening. I knocked on the side of their tent. "Ben? Taylor? You guys okay?" There was no response. I knocked again, harder this time, calling out their names. Still nothing. I pulled back the flap of the tent, my heart pounding. The inside was dark, but I could see the outlines of their sleeping bags. Empty. "Where the hell are they?" Alex asked, his voice tight with worry. They must have gone out, I said, though I didn't know why they would leave in the middle of the storm. It didn't make sense. We checked around the campsite, shining our flashlights into the trees, looking for any sign of movement. But the woods were eerily silent. The storm raged around us, but nothing in the forest seemed to stir. No rustling leaves, no distant animal calls, nothing. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Something wasn't right. We started calling for them, Ben, Taylor, but there was no answer. The rain made everything harder to hear, and the deeper we went to the forest, the more distant our voices seemed. It felt like the woods were swallowing them up, and with every step, the fear inside me grew. Suddenly, we heard something, soft footsteps in the distance, a crack of twigs underfoot. Ben? I called. Taylor? We waited, holding our breath. The footsteps came closer, slow and deliberate. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, just a silhouette at first, barely visible against the darkness. Guys? Alex called, stepping forward. But when the figure stepped into the light, we both froze in place. It wasn't Ben. It wasn't Taylor. The figure was tall, hunched over, and covered in what looked like wet, tattered clothing. Its face was hidden, but it had long, stringy hair that clung to its head, dripping with rainwater. It moved slowly, dragging itself through the mud like it couldn't, or wouldn't, stand up straight. Its skin was pale, almost sickly, and its hands were long, thin, and clawed. It looked like something that shouldn't exist, something that didn't belong in the world of the living. I felt my stomach drop, my heart racing in terror. The thing didn't speak. It didn't need to. It just stared at us with eyes that glowed faintly, like they were reflecting the light of our flashlights. The rain seemed to stop for a moment, like the world had gone still, and then it took a step toward us. I wanted to run. My legs were already moving, but Alex grabbed my arm, his voice barely a whisper. We need to get out of here. Now. But the thing wasn't done with us. It reached out a hand, its fingers stretching toward us with unnatural speed. In that instant, I didn't think, I just ran. We bolted through the woods, sprinting as fast as we could through the rain. We didn't stop until we reached the edge of the campsite, panting and terrified. We didn't look back. We didn't say anything. We packed up in a daze, just throwing everything into our bags without even bothering to fold it properly. We couldn't leave fast enough. When we finally reached the road, we didn't even wait to catch our breath. We piled into the car, doors slamming behind us. As we drove away, I couldn't help but look back. The forest loomed in the distance, dark and silent. We never went back to that place, and I still hear it sometimes, the faint scrape, the slow breathing, the echo of something dragging itself through the rain. Story the end.
Story number 7.
It was supposed to be a fun, relaxing weekend trip, just a group of friends escaping the bustle of city life for a few days in the woods. We hadn't all gotten together in a while, so when Jason suggested a camping trip to a remote spot he found near the Adirondacks, we all agreed. Jason had a reputation for finding hidden gems, places off the beaten path that were quiet and beautiful. This place, as it turned out, was perfect. It was secluded, deep in the woods, and had a small lake where we could fish, swim, and just relax away from everything. There were 5 of us: Jason, Emily, my brother Kyle, and 2 of our childhood friends, Liz and Nate. We all piled into cars, packed up tents and gear, and made the drive out of the city. The drive itself was an adventure. The roads were long and winding, and the further we went, the more isolated it felt. When we finally reached the trailhead, it was late afternoon and the sky was beginning to darken. "We're almost there," Jason called back from the front. "Just a little farther." We parked at the trailhead and unloaded our gear. The walk to the camp was a bit longer than we expected, but the scenery was beautiful. Tall trees surrounded us, their thick branches and leaves creating a canopy that blocked most of the fading sunlight. The air was cool, with a faint scent of pine and damp earth. It felt peaceful, almost otherworldly in its silence. We were the only ones on the trail. When we finally reached the campsite, it was just past dusk. There was a small clearing near the lake, and it felt like the perfect place to set up. The lake was still, reflecting the overcast sky above, and the air was thick with humidity from the approaching rain. We quickly set up our tents and started a fire, eager to cook dinner and relax. The rain started softly, just a light drizzle, but as we sat around the fire, it grew heavier. We pulled our chairs closer to the flames and huddled under a large tarp Jason had brought. The fire crackled as the rain began to pour down, and the sound of it hitting the tarp created a soothing rhythm. The flickering light from the fire made the rain-soaked woods look almost magical, mysterious and serene. We spent the evening talking and reminiscing, catching up on each other's lives. But as the night wore on, the air grew colder and the rain showed no signs of letting up. Around midnight, the fire was almost out, and we decided to turn in. It had been a long day, and we were all tired. Kyle and I shared a tent, while Jason and Emily shared another, and Liz and Nate took the last one. The rain beat against the tent fabric, a constant reminder of the storm outside. I fell asleep quickly, lulled by the sound of the rain and the warmth of the sleeping bag. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. It was pitch black outside and the rain had only intensified, but it wasn't the storm that had woken me. It was a sound, a faint rustling coming from outside the tent. I held still, straining to listen, but everything was drowned out by the heavy rain. I looked over at Kyle, who was sound asleep beside me. I was about to lie back down when I heard it again. A faint shuffle, almost like footsteps, but too soft to be sure. My heart skipped a beat. My first thought was that it was an animal, maybe a deer or something larger, like a bear. But then I remembered something. Jason had told us that there were no bears in the area anymore. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I lay there in the dark, waiting for the sound to stop, but it didn't. Instead, it came closer, slowly and deliberately. It was almost like something was pacing around our tent. I didn't dare make a sound. The sound of wet feet slapping against the ground was unmistakable now. Whatever it was circling us. I held my breath and listened harder. The rain masked everything else, but there was no denying that there was something out there. The shuffling continued, coming closer and closer. It stopped just a few feet away from our tent, right next to the rainfly. Then, to my horror, I heard something else. A soft tapping, like fingers rapping against the fabric. I squeezed my eyes shut and held my breath, too terrified to move. I wanted to wake Kyle, to tell him what was happening, but I couldn't bring myself to make a sound. The tapping stopped, and the rustling moved away from our tent, back toward the trees. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, wide-eyed and listening. The rain continued to pound down, but the strange noises never came back. In the morning, when the light finally broke through the clouds, I convinced myself that I had imagined it. Maybe the wind or the trees creaking in the storm. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. When we all gathered for breakfast, I could see that I wasn't the only one who had been unsettled. Jason looked tense, and Emily seemed on edge. Liz and Nate were already packing up, and Kyle had that nervous energy about him, like something was bothering him too. No one said anything at first. We ate in silence, the sound of the rain still lingering in the air. The world felt quieter than it should have been. After breakfast, we decided to take a hike around the lake to shake off the unease that had settled over us. The rain had slowed to a light mist, and the woods looked even more eerie in the soft light. We walked along the trail, the waterlogged ground squelching beneath our boots. The trees seemed to close in around us, the heavy branches blocking out most of the light. It was the kind of place that felt like it should have been deserted, like we were the only living things for miles. Halfway around the lake, we stopped to take in the view. The water was still, but there was something off about the way the mist hovered over it. It felt like we were standing on the edge of something ancient, something old and forgotten. "That's strange," Liz said, breaking the silence. We all turned to look at her. She was staring at something just beyond the water's edge, where the trees gave way to a small patch of thick brush. "What is it?" Jason asked. Liz pointed. "There's something over there. Something strange." We all squinted in the direction she was pointing. It was hard to make out through the fog, but there was a shape, a dark silhouette, standing just at the edge of the brush. It looked like a person, but it didn't move, and it was too far from the trail to be anyone else hiking the area. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Is anyone else seeing that?" I asked. Jason's face was tight. "It's probably just a tree or something." But even as he said it, I could tell he didn't believe it. He started walking toward the shape, his steps purposeful. "I'll go check it out." We followed hesitantly, not wanting to be the ones left behind. As we got closer, the shape became clearer. It was a figure standing in the brush, tall but not fully visible. It was as though it was standing just outside of sight, a vague outline, too still to be real. It didn't seem to have any distinguishing features. No face, no movement. Jason paused. "What the hell is this?" he muttered under his breath. That's when I saw it. A flash of pale skin, the faintest hint of movement, like something darting out from the trees. I froze. The shape wasn't a person at all. It was a figure, but it wasn't human, at least not in any way that made sense. I turned to the others, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to get out of here." But it was too late. The figure jerked, its limbs twisting unnaturally, like it was trying to break free from some invisible force. It began to move, fast, too fast, jerking and twitching like it wasn't quite right. It was coming toward us. We turned and ran, not caring about anything except getting back to camp. The sound of something following us, a shuffling, dragging sound, echoed behind us, getting closer and closer. We didn't stop until we were back at camp, panting and out of breath. We didn't stay much longer after that. No one spoke about what we had seen. It was as though we were all afraid that if we said it aloud, it would somehow make it real. The rest of the day passed in a blur. We packed up our tents, gathered our things, and left as quickly as we could, not even bothering to take one last look at the lake. None of us have been back to that place since. Every time it rains, I remember the figure, the way it moved, the unnatural twitching, the feeling that it wasn't just something out of place, but something wrong. We talk about that trip sometimes, but only in hushed voices, as if saying too much would invite whatever followed us that day. I don't know what it was, but I know we shouldn't have been there, and I know I'll never forget the sound of that shuffling, dragging thing chasing us through the woods. Story the end.
Story number 8.
We'd been planning this trip for months, and we were all excited. It was supposed to be a getaway, a time to disconnect, recharge, and enjoy nature. There were 6 of us: me, my cousin Emma, her boyfriend Josh, my childhood friend Tyler, his girlfriend Mia, and my best friend Lila. We had rented a cabin at a remote camping site deep in the forests of the Smoky Mountains. The location was secluded, far from the nearest town, and the website promised it was the perfect spot for outdoor lovers. We didn't really consider the rain forecasted for the weekend. In fact, none of us had much of a worry, given how good our previous camping experiences had been. We drove up Friday afternoon, eager to leave behind the bustle of city life. The further we went, the more the trees closed in around us, the more the roads narrowed. By the time we arrived at the campsite, the sky had started to darken. The area had been chosen specifically for its isolation, so the cabin was nestled far from other campsites, bordered by thick trees and a large, murky lake. I'll never forget the first thing I thought when I saw the lake. It looked like something from a horror movie. Dark, choppy waters that reflected the sky like a mirror, but with an unnatural distortion. There were no boats on the water, no animals, just a stillness that felt almost oppressive. After unloading our gear, we set up camp in the cabin, a rustic structure with wooden walls and an old fireplace. It wasn't luxurious by any means, but it had a certain charm to it. The rain started coming down in a steady pour as we settled in for the evening. The smell of damp earth and wet wood filled the air as we lit the fireplace and popped open a few bottles of wine. The warmth of the fire was comforting, and we sat in a circle on the cabin's wooden floors, exchanging stories and playing cards. As the night wore on, the rain intensified, pounding against the roof and windows like a drumbeat. We decided to venture outside for a moment to stretch our legs and get some fresh air, but as we stepped out onto the porch, the air felt thick, heavy with moisture. The forest around us was completely silent. No wind, no rustling of leaves, nothing. It was like the whole world had gone still. It didn't seem right. Tyler, always the brave one, suggested we take a quick walk to the lake. We all hesitated, but after a few drinks, we agreed. The rain soaked through our jackets as we made our way through the dense forest, our flashlights casting long shadows across the wet ground. The path to the lake was narrow, and with every step, the air grew colder. When we finally reached the water's edge, we stood there for a few moments, listening to the sound of the rain hitting the lake, It was almost mesmerizing, yet there was something unsettling about it. The water rippled unnaturally, as if something beneath the surface was moving, though we couldn't see anything. We joked nervously, making light of our discomfort, but I could tell everyone was beginning to feel the same unease. As we turned to head back, that's when we heard it. A soft sound, like a child's voice calling out from the trees. Help! It was faint, barely audible over the rain, but it was there. At first, we thought it was someone else at the campsite, maybe someone who'd gotten lost. But the more we listened, the more we realized it was coming from deep within the woods, far away from the trail we'd just walked. It was an odd, unnatural sound. The voice was distorted, strained, almost as if it were calling out in pain. We stood there for a moment, frozen, trying to make sense of what we had just heard. Tyler was the first to break the silence. "Did you guys hear that?" he asked, his voice low. We nodded, though no one said anything for a long time. We all felt it, the deep, unnerving sense that something wasn't right. The voice had stopped, but the air felt wrong now, heavy with something sinister. I tried to laugh it off, suggesting it was just the wind playing tricks on us, but no one was convinced. We made our way back to the cabin quickly, and when we got inside, we locked the door behind us and huddled around the fire. No one said much for a while. The atmosphere had changed, and even the warmth of the fire couldn't shake the tension. Eventually, Emma broke the silence. "You guys think someone else is out there?" "It didn't sound like anyone," Lila said, her voice shaking slightly. It sounded. She trailed off, searching for the right words. "Like a child," Mia finished for her, her face pale. I glanced out the window, but all I could see was the rain, falling in sheets, obscuring the view. It was as if the forest was closing in around us. The hours passed slowly, and despite our best efforts to distract ourselves, the feeling of unease lingered. As the rain continued to pour, the temperature dropped, and we all huddled together, wrapped in blankets. By 2 a.m., everyone had gone to bed. My mind wouldn't stop racing. I kept hearing that voice in my head, soft, distant, and filled with sorrow. It wouldn't go away. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound that made my blood run cold. The door to the cabin creaked open. I lay there, listening, my heart thumping in my chest. I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the floor. The sound of them was muffled by the thick carpet of the cabin, but it was unmistakable. Someone was inside the cabin with us. I slowly reached for my phone, but the screen was dark. The power was out. The storm outside had knocked out the electricity. I nudged Lila, who was sleeping beside me, and whispered, "Lila, wake up. Do you hear that?" She didn't respond, but her breathing had changed. She was awake now, too, listening. The footsteps continued, moving through the cabin. They sounded like they were coming from the other side of the room, then toward the door. Then, nothing. I lay there completely still, holding my breath. My mind raced. Was it someone who had gotten lost? Someone from another campsite? Or, worse, was it something else? The voice from earlier seemed to echo in my mind. "Help!" Then I heard something I wasn't prepared for. A soft, almost childlike giggle coming from the corner of the room. I froze. Lila squeezed my hand, her fingers tight with fear. I wanted to scream, to get up and run, but my body wouldn't move. The giggling grew louder, more distinct, like a child playing in the corner of the cabin. I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my flashlight, and pointed it toward the corner where the sound had come from. The beam of light cut through the dark, and there, standing in the corner of the room, was a figure. A small, pale figure, drenched to the bone, wearing a tattered dress. Her hair was tangled and matted with rain, and her eyes were black, deep, hollow voids that seemed to absorb all the light. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. She just stood there, staring at us. Lila screamed, and the figure's lips curled into a twisted smile. Without thinking, I rushed to the door and slammed it open, pushing past the others and running into the rain. I didn't care about anything but getting out of that cabin. I heard them behind me, footsteps followed by a whisper, "Help me." We ran through the downpour, not knowing where we were going, just knowing we had to get away. When we reached the edge of the lake, I turned around, gasping for breath. The cabin was far behind us, but the lake stretched endlessly in front of us, the water dark and still. That's when we saw it. In the distance, near the shore, the figure stood, her eyes fixed on us. We didn't look back again as we ran, not stopping until we reached the ranger station miles away. The police didn't find anything when they investigated the cabin. There were no footprints, no evidence of anyone being there, but we all knew what we had seen. What we had heard, the voice, the footsteps, the figure, none of it was natural. And I'll never forget those eyes. Story the end.
Story number 9.
We had been planning the camping trip for months, and by the time the weekend finally rolled around, we were more than ready to escape the grind of everyday life. There were 6 of us, me, my girlfriend Jessie, and our 4 friends, Adam, Lisa, Mark, and Katie. All of us had grown up together, and while we weren't all as close as we used to be, we still shared a deep bond from years of summer trips and late-night conversations. This year, we decided to camp in a remote spot in the Cascades. It wasn't a popular location, at least not among the mainstream camping crowd. It was an old site we'd found through an obscure hiking blog. The spot promised privacy, quiet, and a view that was supposed to be spectacular. The hike in was about 5 miles, but none of us were worried. We were all experienced campers, and the idea of getting away from the bustle of city life was exhilarating. The weather had been decent all week, with just a few scattered showers, but the forecast for the weekend showed a bit of rain, which didn't bother us. We were all prepared for it. We arrived around noon on Friday, parked our cars at a clearing by the trailhead, and began our hike. The weather was still holding up, and by the time we reached the site, the forest was beautiful, dense and green, with towering trees and thick underbrush. We found a clearing near a small stream and set up our tents, a campfire ring, and a tarp to shield us from any potential rain. The area felt peaceful, almost serene, and for a few hours it was exactly what we wanted. We laughed, joked around, and caught up with each other while cooking up some hot dogs and burgers over the fire. The first evening passed without incident, and by the time we crawled into our tents for the night, the sound of rain had started gently tapping on the leaves overhead. But it wasn't long before the night started to take an unsettling turn. I had no idea why I woke up that night. I didn't have to go to the bathroom, and I wasn't cold. But something about the stillness of the night made me uneasy. I turned over, my eyes adjusting to the darkness inside the tent. Jessie was still fast asleep beside me, the sound of her breathing rhythmic and steady. Outside, the rain had intensified, and the noise of it pounding against the tarp was almost deafening. I lay there, just listening. The wind rustled the trees, making the sounds of distant branches creaking and leaves shifting. Then I heard something else, a faint sound. It was subtle at first, like a twig snapping or a footstep in the mud. I froze, holding my breath, straining to listen. It wasn't an animal, it was too deliberate. Someone was walking through the woods, slowly, methodically. I sat up, my heart suddenly racing. "Jessie," I whispered, gently shaking her shoulder. "Hey, Jessie." She stirred but didn't wake up. The sound continued, someone or something walking outside our tent. I reached for my flashlight, careful not to wake Jessie fully. The beam of light flickered as I pointed it toward the entrance, but the tent was silent. The footsteps had stopped. I waited for a few moments, but the stillness hung in the air like a thick fog. My instinct told me it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a bear. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I lay back down, forcing myself to relax, but the uneasy feeling didn't go away. Every now and then I thought I could hear the soft sound of a breath, a rasping, faint noise, like someone standing just outside breathing slowly. I didn't move, too scared to even look outside again. It wasn't until I heard the same sound again, about 10 minutes later, that I finally worked up the courage to unzip the tent. I stepped outside, holding my flashlight tight, sweeping it through the darkness. The rain had become heavier, and the world around us was reduced to a blurry silhouette. The air smelled wet, earthy, and thick with the scent of pine. I couldn't see anything clearly, and my flashlight cut through the dark like a weak beam. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling more than I expected. "Is someone out there?" No answer, just the sound of the rain and the distant rustling of leaves. I stepped further away from the tent, looking around the clearing. The footprints in the mud seemed to be washed away by the rain. There was no sign of anyone around. The forest stood quiet and still. I stood there for a few more moments, heart pounding in my chest, before slowly returning to the tent. I crawled back into my sleeping bag, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. Jessie was still asleep. I didn't tell anyone what had happened when we woke up the next morning. I didn't want to alarm anyone, especially since it seemed like it had just been my imagination. The rain had cleared up by the time we got up, and the forest looked completely different in the morning light. The dampness hung in the air, but the sun was starting to break through the clouds. Everyone was in a good mood, and we spent the day hiking around the area, enjoying the landscape, taking pictures, and relaxing by the stream. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Every time I turned a corner or heard a noise, I felt like I was being watched. That night, the rain returned. Heavier this time, accompanied by a wind that made the trees sway dangerously. We had planned to stay up late around the campfire, but by 9 p.m., the rain was coming down so hard that we retreated into our tents. I remember lying there, listening to the sound of the storm, trying to fall asleep. Jessie was snuggled close beside me, her soft breathing making the tense atmosphere feel a little more bearable. Then I heard it again, a noise outside the tent. It was subtle at first, but unmistakable. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving around our campsite. My heart began to race, and I turned to Jessie. "Jessie," I whispered urgently, "wake up!" She stirred, but didn't fully wake. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent cautiously, scanning the darkness. The storm had made everything seem muffled. The trees, the rocks, the forest floor, everything seemed muted under the heavy downpour. I couldn't see anything, not even a shadow. "Hello?" I called again. "Is anyone out there?" There was no reply, just the rustling of branches in the wind and the sound of the rain. I turned to go back inside the tent when something caught my eye. A figure standing at the edge of the clearing, tall, cloaked in darkness. I froze, staring at it. The figure was unmoving, just standing there in the rain, facing me. For a moment, I thought it might be Adam or Mark messing around, trying to spook me. But then I realized it wasn't one of them. It was too still, too silent. I blinked and the figure was gone. I rushed back into the tent, my heart pounding in my chest. Jessie had woken up by then and was looking at me with concern. "What's going on?" she asked. "I saw something," I said, trying to steady my breath. Someone was out there." "Are you sure?" Jessie asked. "It was probably just the storm, the trees and the rain. Everything looks weird in the dark." "I don't know," I said, not sure what I believed anymore. I didn't sleep that night. Every small sound had me on edge. Every rustling in the trees, every drop of water hitting the ground felt like something more than it was. I could still see the figure in my mind, tall and dark, standing just outside the tent, staring. The next morning, we decided to pack up early. No one really knew why. We all just felt it. That sense that something was wrong, something was off. We broke camp, packed our gear, and left the clearing as quickly as we could. The hike back felt longer than it should have, and every time I glanced over my shoulder, I half expected to see someone watching us from the trees. We made it to the cars without incident, but as we drove away, I noticed something strange. The rain had stopped, the skies had cleared, but all along the road, the trees seemed unnaturally still. And in the distance, I thought I saw something, or someone, standing at the edge of the forest, watching us. No one else saw it, but I know what I saw. I've never been camping since. None of us have. Story the end.
Story number 10.
The first time we heard about the spot, it seemed perfect. A secluded campsite near the edge of the forest, nestled in the mountains, far away from everything. Just what we needed. A chance to escape our busy lives and spend a weekend hiking, fishing, and unwinding. There were 6 of us. My childhood friend Eric, his girlfriend Tessa, my brother Josh, and our friends Jenna, Mark, and me. We had been planning this camping trip for months, eagerly counting down the days. We didn't expect anything strange to happen, but we were about to find out that sometimes nature has its own plans. The drive up to the campsite was longer than we anticipated, but the views along the way were beautiful. Dense forests, sweeping valleys, and mist-covered mountains that seemed to go on forever. By the time we arrived, the sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting an orange glow across the landscape. The trailhead was unmarked, and we had to rely on a vague description Eric had found online. But after a few wrong turns, we finally found it, the secluded area where we would camp for the next 3 days. The campsite was small, tucked away in a dense grove of pine trees. The ground was soft, damp from the recent rain, but it felt peaceful, isolated from the world. We set up our tents quickly, laughing and joking as we worked, eager to get the fire started before dark. As the sky darkened, we gathered around the campfire, the crackling of the flames the only sound in the air. The forest around us seemed to grow still, the only movement coming from the branches swaying gently in the wind. The rain started just as we were finishing dinner, light at first but increasing in intensity as the night went on. We retreated to the shelter of our tents, but the rain didn't stop. The pitter-patter against the tent fabric was soothing at first, a gentle lullaby that helped me drift to sleep. But it didn't stay that way for long. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of something moving outside our tent. It was faint at first, just a soft rustling, but it quickly grew louder, closer. I held my breath, straining to hear over the sound of the rain. It didn't sound like an animal. It was too deliberate, too purposeful. I could hear footsteps, slow, heavy, dragging across the wet ground. I tried to wake Josh, but he was fast asleep next to me, snoring softly. I didn't want to wake anyone else. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe a deer or some other animal wandering through the campsite. But then I heard something else. A voice, faint but distinct. "Help. Help me." The voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it was unmistakable. It sounded human, and it was coming from just outside the tent. I froze, my heart racing. I wasn't sure if I had imagined it or if it was real, but I couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread that washed over me. The voice came again, this time clearer, more urgent. "Please, help me." The footsteps outside the tent shifted, and I heard something. Someone scraping the ground, dragging their feet through the mud. I wanted to move, to do something, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed by fear, unsure of what to do. I thought about calling out, asking if someone else had heard it, but I couldn't bring myself to say a word. The sound stopped for a moment, and then, almost in slow motion, the fabric of the tent pressed in as if something was leaning against it. I held my breath, willing myself to stay calm. And then, just as suddenly, it was gone. The rain continued to fall, and the night returned to its normal rhythm. I don't know how much time passed before I fell asleep again, but when I woke up in the morning, the feeling of unease lingered. I wasn't sure if what had happened was real or if it had been a dream, but the memory of the voice stuck with me. I decided not to mention it to anyone. I didn't want to seem paranoid, especially since nothing else had happened. The morning was gray and misty, the kind of weather that seemed to seep into your bones. We ate breakfast, made coffee, and talked about the plans for the day: hiking, fishing, and exploring the nearby trails. But even though I tried to focus on the activities, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was an energy in the air, something I couldn't put into words. I noticed that none of us were speaking as freely as we had the day before. Everyone seemed a little on edge. As the day wore on, we hiked along the trails, but the atmosphere around us remained thick, like the air itself was holding its breath. The trees were unnaturally still, and the wind barely stirred the branches. We joked about the eerie quiet, but there was no denying the tension we all felt. At times, it felt like the forest itself was watching us, waiting for something. By late afternoon, we reached a small clearing near a creek. The sound of the water rushing over the rocks was calming, and we decided to take a break. Eric and Mark went down to the creek to fish, while the rest of us sat near the edge of the clearing. As I sat there, I couldn't help but notice how the fog seemed to grow thicker, how the shadows between the trees deepened. I kept glancing over my shoulder as though expecting something or someone to emerge from the trees. It was Tessa who first noticed something strange. She was sitting across from me, her brow furrowed as she stared into the woods behind us. "Do you see that?" she asked. We all turned to look, following her gaze. At first, I didn't see anything. But then I noticed it, a dark figure standing just at the edge of the trees, partially obscured by the mist. It was too far away to make out any details, but it looked like a person standing completely still. We all stared at it for a long moment, unsure of what to do. "It's probably just someone else camping nearby," Josh said after a long pause. but there was something unsettling about the way the figure stood. It wasn't moving, and it didn't seem like it was part of the natural world around us. I had the same gut feeling I'd had the night before, that something wasn't right. "Let's go back to camp," Jenna suggested, her voice tense. We packed up quickly, more out of a sense of unease than urgency. We didn't speak much on the way back to camp, each of us lost in our thoughts. When we reached the campsite, we noticed something strange. The ground near our tents was disturbed, like someone had been walking around. But we hadn't left any footprints, and there was no sign of anyone else. The air felt thick, heavy, with the sense that something was lurking just beyond our sight. That night, the rain came again, heavy and unrelenting. It pounded against the tents, the wind howling through the trees. We huddled together around the fire, trying to ignore the sense of unease that still hung in the air. But as the night wore on, it became harder to shake the feeling that something was wrong. No one was willing to say it out loud, but we all felt it. It was as though the forest was alive with something ancient and malicious. Around midnight, the wind picked up even more, and the rain seemed to come down in sheets. The fire sputtered and died, and we retreated to our tents, each of us feeling a growing sense of dread. I lay in my sleeping bag, trying to ignore the sound of the storm outside, but I couldn't. The rain was too loud, the wind too violent, and then, in the midst of it all, I heard it again. The same voice, faint but distinct. "Help me, please." I froze, my heart racing. This time, it wasn't just outside my tent. It was close, too close. It was as though the voice was right next to me, coming from the darkness just beyond the fabric. I could hear the dragging of feet again, like something was crawling, dragging itself across the wet ground. The voice was desperate now, filled with an unbearable sadness. "Help me." I was paralyzed. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I wanted to wake Josh, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything. The voice seemed to get louder, more insistent, until it felt like it was inside my head, echoing through my mind. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. The rest of the night passed in a blur of terror and confusion. We all slept fitfully, the fear lingering like a dark cloud over us. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the air heavy and damp. The fog had rolled in thick, blanketing the forest in a ghostly haze. None of us spoke about what had happened. We all knew, deep down, that something had followed us into the woods, something that was not of this world. As we packed up our camp and prepared to leave, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest seemed to loom around us, dark and oppressive. We left that day without looking back. None of us ever spoke about what happened, not in any detail. But every time it rains, I remember the voice, the dragging footsteps, and the feeling that something was watching us, something that wanted us to help, even though it wasn't human. Story the end.